And without further ado, since we're running a little bit behind, I will introduce you to Chris. And whenever Chris finishes talking, I will. Paul will take over, and you only have literally a couple of minutes to do the wrap up. Paul, you're okay. I'll leave the floor to you, Chris.
Hey, Vicky, thanks very much. So yeah, I'll try to be brief, which I know some people on here will laugh at that particular statement of my trying to be brief, but I shall do my best. So I suppose very quickly, just to start off, my talk is all about making a maker. And I suppose just to begin, my definition of a maker is my definition. Clearly, it is not everybody's definition. However, this is what I believe. So I suppose I believe that everybody is a maker. And I really mean everybody. Everybody can make things. It doesn't really matter what you make. I think what's very important is, and we kind of spoke about this in the breakout rooms, is perhaps how you feel when you make something. So the making is the important thing. So at some point in time, we all make food or we make a shelf, or it doesn't really matter what we make, but we all make. And almost always, the feeling that we have after we've completed something, or maybe not even completed it, is a positive, good feeling. And that is really important. And in education, I think that's doubly important because students are often told that they're brilliant, but I wonder if they're told too often that they're brilliant. Or more accurately, are they told they're brilliant, but do they feel that they're brilliant? Or have they just been rewarded for actually completing the task? So I do believe that makers, by their definition, or perhaps by my definition more than anybody else's, so makers are people who create. They're people who tinker with things. They're designers. They're fabricators, dabblers, builders, producers, inventors, chefs, enthusiasts, DIYers. They're specialists. They're anything. Everybody is a maker. I suppose anybody that rearranges the world around them is a maker. So during lockdown, this bit of a mess or disaster that you see behind me, which is fairly tidy for me, is, gosh, I hope that's terrible. My apologies, that was back there. So that was rearranged by me. I did that during the lockdown. I stripped this room and I kind of rebuilt it to suit me a little bit better. So I rearranged that. But that's a physical space. You can rearrange things electronically. Coders are makers. People who design things electronically are makers. People who create spreadsheets are makers. And even at that, I would very much believe that making is also a mixture of science and art. And I don't mean science from, in a laboratory with experiments and chemicals making things fizz. I just mean general scientific things. I often, when I give a talk like this, especially to students, I often use the analogy of cooking and baking. So cooking and baking are different things. So baking is scientific. When you bake bread, when you bake cookies or biscuits, when you bake something, almost always the ingredients have to be correct. Otherwise, the recipe will not turn out correctly. But cooking is different. Cooking is art. Cooking is about flavor. Cooking is about how you. Thank you, Will. I see that comment there, and you're quite right. It's applied chemistry. Well done, Will. You're so good, Will. Will, you should be doing this. In fairness, it's brilliant. So that's the difference between the two things, but it's all making. So cooking, baking is all making. The same is true whether I pick up a hammer and nails and screws, whether I pick up a microbit or a makey or an Arduino to code it. It's all about making. And in fact, this was mentioned a number of times. It's all about combining many of those things. And I think the willingness to try different things is very important. But I also think naturally one will lead to another. So, in terms of making something in a project, if you start with something, there's almost always different aspects to it. And I think that's very important in education. And again, in our breakout room, we spoke about that. We spoke about the different aspects of project based learning versus the standardized education in many places where you get a worksheet. The teacher gives you a worksheet, and that's what you do, and that's it, as opposed to a long ongoing project. In my experience, I have found students really engage a lot more with a project, that each person's strength can be used within that project. And that's about making. Um, I suppose, again, we're makers, we're all makers, I believe, in terms of we make food, we make shelter, we sew, we paint, we put things together, we cleaning is making, and we take things apart to see how they work. All of those skills now, I believe, are not as common as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I think there's a real desire for those skills in education to be integrated to the rest of the skills, to be brought back. I know that in many places, in Finland, for instance, which is often referenced as a place having very good education, many schools, primary schools in Finland, um, have shops in the way of metal working, woodworking shops. And those places, those shops, they use saws and hammers and knives and really dangerous things with young people, and they have almost no accidents because they're taught how to do it. When students in Finland leave primary school, many of them can sew a button, make a meal, wire a plug, hang a shelf. And all of those skills are equally as important as being able to um, add, subtract, multiply, and divide, and as to read and write. But we don't all have strengths in all of those things. And this was highlighted frequently, I think, in terms of students and strengths. And I suppose a maker allows someone to gain extra skills while being comfortable in the strengths that they have. And perhaps those strengths are just woodworking and nothing else. They can do amazing things with wood, but perhaps they're not good with electronics. But that is okay, because those things can be added to over time and practiced in a very safe and comfortable environment. Um, I won't take up too much time because, again, I know that we've run over time and things like that. I suppose we've spoken a lot in terms of assessmake and doing things like that for 21st century skills, in such as problem solving, imagination, innovation, creation, tinkering. All of these kind of things are 21st century skills, and those, I think that's very important, because those are the kinds of skills that students, I believe, are not focusing on. Or perhaps actually that's the wrong way to put it. Not that the students aren't focusing on it, but perhaps the education systems in all of our countries are not focusing on quite as much. Um, I suppose in terms of making, when you do something that you feel good about, okay, was that involved, or did it involve making something? And again, consider what making might be. And I think that's important, considering what making might be. To me, making is not 3D printers and ginormous CNC machines. Does it include those? Of course it includes those. Is it a requirement to have those to be a maker? No, it is not. Behind me, again, I can only use myself as an example. I have piles and boxes of absolute rubbish. It's literally things I have picked up off the ground because I see a value in them. And that brings me to systems and how things work. And I'll kind of very quickly talk about this and then finish up. So for me, I'm very interested in systems and how systems work, but more importantly, how things fit together. Now, there's lots of systems. So there's computer systems, there's respiratory systems, there's the healthcare system, there's certainly the education system. And understanding how those systems work will make life a little bit easier. And being a maker and exploring how those systems work, it doesn't matter what the system is, but exploring how they work will make you a maker because then you will know how systems work. And many systems on the planet work in very similar ways. So you might consider a car, or you might consider education, you might consider the respiratory system, you might consider computers. All of those systems have an in and they have an out. Education system, you enter the education system when you're young and you leave the education system with something more. Cars, fuel in, car drives, emissions out, except for electric cars, of course. So there's lots and lots of different systems, and systems and making go together hand in hand in my belief. So I'd finish up just with one of my favorite phrases, and then I'll pass back over to Vicky and then to Paul just to finish everything up. So just, I suppose the world that we live in, as people, and however we affect that world, the world doesn't just exist. The world did not just suddenly pop out of nowhere. Um, the world was made by us, by all of us. We made the world, we make the world, and we make the world that we live in. So we are all makers. So I have no more to say than that, and I will pass you back over to Paul and to Vicky then, so and they can finish up on time.
Thank you, Chris. You're too kind. I was going to say I'm going to leave you extra minutes anyway.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, maker is always kind of the label where it's very hard to define for some people who don't define themselves as makers, even though I'm trying to say you are a maker.